Ife arrived in the kitchen, where Tayo's mother handed her a bag of food items to prepare a pot of soup for them to eat. Soup? Ife's eyes widened in shock as she looked at the bag on the counter. I've never cooked before, what should I do? She thought, panicking as she began to empty the bag on the kitchen counter. Going through the ingredients, Ife wondered what she was going to do with them. She couldn't believe Tayo's mother was making her cook on her first visit to her house. Is this a test to see if I'm good enough for her son? She thought, as sweat began to pour down her face. It can't be that bad, Ife said to herself, as she threw all the ingredients into the pot, including whole peppers and onions, and filled the pot with water. She brought the pot to a boil, hoping and praying for the soup to come out right. She tried calling Tayo, but his line wouldn't connect. Ife paced from one end of the kitchen to the other, trying to figure out a way to escape the house. She pushed on the kitchen door leading outside, but it was locked. She tried the kitchen window, but it was too small to fit through. Stuck in the kitchen, Ife watched as the pot came to a boil. After a few minutes, Tayo's mother came in to check on the food. She opened the pot and screamed in terror. What is this? She asked. Ife told her it was her own special way of preparing the soup. Leave my kitchen this minute, she screamed at Ife, who ran out of the kitchen and left the house entirely. A few minutes later, Tayo returned and found his mother fuming. Is everything okay, mother? He asked. She took him to the kitchen to show him the pot of soup that Ife had made. Tayo burst out laughing when he saw the ingredients floating in the pot, including whole peppers and onions that weren't even chopped or blended. Mama, why would you tell her to cook for you? He asked. His mother said she only wanted to see how good Ife was in the kitchen. Now, you've seen it, Mama. I hope you're happy, Tayo said, still laughing hysterically. Is it that her mother never bothered to teach her how to cook? She asked Tayo, who revealed that Ife was an orphan and never met her parents. You can't marry her, Tayo's mother said with finality, crossing her arms. Tayo, hearing the seriousness in his mother's voice, stopped laughing and looked at her. Mama, cooking skills don't define a person's worth or their capacity to be a good partner. Ife is a wonderful woman, and I love her for who she is, not for her cooking, Tayo replied. His mother said her decision wasn't based on Ife's inability to cook, but on the fact that she was an orphan who didn't know her roots. How can you even think of marrying an orphan who was possibly abandoned by her own mother and father? Do you know why they abandoned her, or the circumstances surrounding her birth and family? Why would you take in an abandoned property as a wife? Tayo's mother asked, her voice filled with disdain. Tayo could not believe how insensitive his mother was towards Ife. Mother, why would you victimize someone for a situation they had no control over? He asked, trying to keep his composure. His mother replied, I don't care about that. All I care about is that my son will never marry an abandoned orphan. Tayo, you can't marry her, and that is final. With that, she stormed off in anger. Tayo stood there, confused and shaken. He had never seen his mother so serious. Feeling frustrated, he got into his car and drove to Ife's house. When he arrived, he found Ife in tears, feeling ashamed and lost. I made a fool out of myself, she said, sobbing. Tayo hugged her tightly, assuring her that everything would be fine. How will I ever face your mother again? Ife asked. Don't worry about my mother, Tayo replied. I am the one who wants to marry you. Ife felt comforted by his words and apologized for ruining their day. Oh no, you didn't ruin anything. It is better they found out this way, so they know I am marrying you for who you are, not for what you can do, Tayo said, making Ife's heart glad. She thanked Tayo for loving her despite her flaws. The next day, Tayo met his friend Kunal at a bar and discussed what had happened at his mother's house. Tayo sought Kunal's advice, feeling unsure of how to handle his mother's demands. Kunal took a sip of his drink and thought for a moment. Tayo, you know your mother loves you and wants the best for you, Kunal said. But sometimes, parents can be too focused on traditions and status. Ife is a good woman, and it's clear you love her. You need to make your stand clear to your mother, but also be respectful. I know, Kunal, Tayo replied. It's just hard to see her so upset and to hear the terrible things she said about Ife. I never expected her to be so against our relationship because Ife is an orphan. Kunal leaned in, offering more advice. Maybe you should try talking to your mother again, calmly. Explain to her why Ife means so much to you, and how her status as an orphan doesn't define her character. If your mother sees how serious you are about Ife, she might come around, but be prepared that it might take time. Encouraged by Kunal's words, Tayo decided to give it another shot. The following day, he went to his mother's house, determined to have a heart-to-heart conversation with her. "Mama," Tayo began, standing next to his mother in the living room, "I understand your concerns, and I respect your opinions. But Ife is a part of my life now, and I love her deeply. Being an orphan doesn't change the fact that she's a kind, caring, and intelligent person. She's faced many challenges in life, but that only makes her stronger. I need you to see her for who she is, not where she comes from." Tayo's mother sighed, her expression softening slightly. "There is something about that girl that I cannot place my finger on. Why don't you just find another girl and marry? She is not the only girl around," she said. "Mama, I am deeply in love with Ife, and I am not willing to marry anyone else," Tayo responded firmly. Tayo pleaded with his mother to understand his decision. Despite being tempted to accept, his mother remained troubled. "No, I will not let it happen," she said sternly, warning Tayo to stay away from Ife. Angrily, Tayo threatened his mother, saying that either she allows him to marry Ife or she loses him forever. "What do you mean by that?" Tayo, his mother asked, concerned. Tayo replied, "You should either allow me to marry Ife or prepare for my funeral." He then walked out on his mother, who sat in her chair, confused and distressed. Tayo was her only son, and she couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to him. Desperate, she decided to visit Ife and warn her to stay away from Tayo. The next evening she arrived at Ife's house, and Ife was shocked to see her. "Good evening, Mama," Ife said, welcoming her in. "I am not here to beat around the bush. I am here to tell you to leave my son alone," Tayo's mother said sternly. "Tayo is my only son, and if you really love him and want the best for him, you would leave him and find another man to love. There are thousands of men out there. Find another and leave my son alone." Tears welled up in Ife's eyes. "Mama, why do you hate me so much? What have I done?" she asked, her voice trembling. Tayo's mother replied, "I am protecting my son from an unknown fate." She told Ife to leave Tayo alone, then walked out of her house. Ife fell to the ground, broken and devastated. She couldn't understand why her life had to be so complicated. All her life, she had yearned for love, but when love finally came, something always happened to deprive her of it. Ife sat there, lost in her thoughts, not noticing when Tayo walked in. "Ife, is everything all right?" he asked, bringing her back to reality. "I am fine. I was just thinking about everything that's been happening," Ife said. Tayo interrupted her, kneeling down and asking her to be his wife. Overcome with excitement, Ife said yes, throwing caution to the wind. However, Tayo's mother's warning continued to echo in her mind. News of their engagement reached Tayo's mother, who called him, demanding he break off the engagement. "What do you have against a poor orphan?" Tayo questioned. His mother tried to convince him to change his mind, but Tayo was resolute. He told his mother she must learn to accept Ife as her daughter-in-law or stay away from him forever. His mother, looking him in the eyes, said the marriage would only happen over her dead body. She walked out, leaving Tayo perplexed by her stubbornness. As wedding preparations began, Tayo's mother stayed away and made no contributions, breaking Tayo's heart. His friend Kunal advised him to put the wedding on hold, arguing he couldn't proceed without his mother's blessing. But Tayo was determined. He needed to prove to Ife that his love was genuine, and backing down would send the wrong message. Tayo did everything within his power to make his mother see reason, but she stood her ground, unwilling to change her mind. So, Tayo returned home, saddened and hoping his mother would come around before the wedding. The night before their wedding, Tayo went to bed but woke up screaming. His friend Kunal, who was sleeping in the next room, rushed in and found Tayo unconscious on the floor. Panicking, Kunal quickly took Tayo to a nearby hospital, but Tayo remained unresponsive. The doctors carried out extensive tests but found nothing wrong with him. "He seems fine," they told Kunal, who then contacted Tayo's mother and Ife. Alarmed by the news, Ife rushed to the hospital and was confronted with the sight of Tayo lying unconscious on the bed. "Doctor, what is wrong with him?" Ife asked, distraught. "We have checked extensively, but nothing seems to be the problem. His vitals are in perfect condition, and we can't figure out why he won't wake up," the doctor explained. Confused and worried, Ife turned to Kunal. "What happened?" "I was fast asleep when I heard a loud scream from his room. I rushed in and found him slumped on the floor. I brought him to the hospital immediately, and then called you and his mother," Kunal recounted. "Where is Mama?" Ife asked. "She hasn't arrived yet. I spoke to her earlier and told her everything. She just hung up the call. I assume she is on her way," Kunal replied. They all stood there, waiting and hoping for Teo to wake up. Ife couldn't believe they were in the hospital on what was supposed to be their wedding day. Hours passed, and Teo's mother was still nowhere to be seen. A few hours later, Kunal received a call from Teo's mother. "Bring Teo to a certain location," she instructed. They immediately rushed Teo to the location, where his mother led them into an abandoned house. Inside, they found a man sitting in the middle of the room, humming a strange song. They laid Teo before him and watched as he performed some rituals to determine the cause of Teo's condition. As they stood there in silence, Teo began to shake vigorously. His mother rushed to his side, pleading with the healer to save her son, but the healer warned her to keep her distance. As they stood there in silence, Teo began to shake vigorously. His mother rushed to his side, pleading with the healer to save her son, but the healer warned her to keep her distance. They all stood there and watched as Teo struggled to breathe, then suddenly stopped. The man looked up at them and pointed his finger at Ife, asking, "What have you done?" Kunal could not believe his eyes, and they all looked at Ife, who began to shake in fear. "Confess," the man screamed at Ife, who stuttered as she spoke. "So many years ago, I dabbled into something that has been haunting me. It was back in my village when I was so young and naive. I fell in love with a young man who promised to marry me. He was so handsome, and all the girls in the village wanted him for themselves. One day, I was returning home from my father's farm when I caught him talking to another girl in the village, who I knew was in love with him. This angered me greatly because I had warned him several times to stay away from that certain girl. When I confronted him, he told me that he was returning home when she stopped to ask for his help. I was so insecure and asked him to prove to me that he was mine and mine alone. He asked me what he could do to prove this to me, and I told him to follow me. We walked into the village forest, to a secluded part that people feared to tread. We arrived at an abandoned shrine, and I told him to take an oath with me, promising never to leave me for another. I was so in love with him. So I was sure that I would never leave him. He asked if this was what I wanted, and I said yes. So we took a blood oath in front of the abandoned shrine, promising each other a lifetime of love, saying that anyone who goes against the oath would suffer severe consequences. I felt secure after that, believing that nothing could ever come between us. However, this was not the case, as something I never anticipated happened. A year later, my boyfriend was involved in a fatal accident that left him blind and paralyzed. Our lives changed drastically as my boyfriend became so agitated and demanding. I could not bear the burden of caring for him for the rest of my life, especially knowing the life we had dreamed of together was now impossible. I felt trapped and desperate and thought of a way out. One morning, overwhelmed by the weight of my circumstances and my desire to escape, I made a drastic decision. I staged my own death, leaving behind some of my clothes smeared with the blood of a goat to make it seem as though I had been killed by a ravenous beast. I knew that it would be difficult for my boyfriend to set me free from the oath at that point in his life. So I did what I felt was best for me at the time to secure my freedom. I fled to the city and never returned. Once I got to the city, I changed my name from Bolu to Ife and adopted the orphan story to make it easy for me to settle down with a man without having to explain my past to him. The first man I met, who declared an interest in marrying me, came to visit me one day in my house and began to scream hysterically, pointing at my face in terror. He called me a monster and took to his heels. The room fell silent, the weight of Ife's confession hanging heavy in the air. The healer continued his rituals, and Teo's body began to shake more violently. Teo's mother, realizing the gravity of the situation, watched in horror as the healer tried to save her son, That was the last time I ever saw him. The second man proposed to me, but he also left mysteriously, accusing me of trying to kill him in his sleep at night. These strange things have been happening. And I never wanted to believe it had anything to do with the oath I took with my boyfriend so many years ago. But seeing Tayo in this condition, I am convinced that the spirit of the shrine is behind his strange condition. The healer spoke up, saying that the spirits of the shrine were angered by the broken oath and wanted a life as compensation. Ife was terrified to hear this. She asked the healer what she could do, and the healer revealed that they had to travel to her village with Tayo, to the shrine where everything began. He ordered that they prepare an animal for sacrifice to see if the spirits would be willing to accept an animal in exchange for the human life. Ife couldn't believe what her selfish actions had caused. She dreaded her return, not knowing how the villagers would react, knowing that she faked her own death. Even her family, who had mourned her for years, her mother and sisters, what would they think of her? She thought of Diji, whom she had left at his lowest after promising him a lifetime of love. Ife was so terrified. She looked at Tayo, the man she deeply loved, lying unconscious because of her. His mother's eyes pierced through her skin with anger and hatred for ruining her son's life, even after she had begged Ife to leave her son alone. My greed and yearning for love clouded my judgment, and I threw all caution to the wind, hoping my marriage to Tayo would be a success. How foolish I was to think that the spirits would let me find happiness elsewhere, Ife thought as they arrived at her village. Everything seemed so different as Ife led them to the forest, to the shrine where it all began. When they arrived at the shrine, Ife saw something she never expected. Deji, the man she promised a lifetime of love, sat in front of the shrine. He was no longer blind or crippled, and he stared at her with hatred in his eyes. "You have finally returned," he said to Ife, who stuttered, asking him what he was doing at the shrine. "I am the chief priest of this great shrine," he said. "How is that possible?" Ife asked, as Diji narrated the whole story to her. "A few weeks before my accident, I was approached by a certain man who told me I was chosen to serve in the shrine. I laughed in his face, thinking it was a joke, but the strange man warned me that if I refused to answer my calling, something terrible would happen to me. I ignored the warning and continued with my life, but the accident happened, leaving me blind and crippled. In my despair, the same man visited me in a dream, telling me that only by serving the shrine could I be healed. I had no other choice. I accepted my fate and took up my role as the chief priest. Gradually, my sight and strength returned, but with it came a new purpose to uphold the shrine's will and avenge any wrongs done to it." Ife stood there, unable to speak, as Diji continued. "You broke the oath, Ife. You tried to escape the consequences, but the spirits are not so easily deceived. The spirits demand a life, and they will not rest until they have it." Tayo's mother, horrified by the revelation, turned to the healer. "What can we do to save my son?" she pleaded. The healer responded, "We must perform the sacrifice and beg the spirits for mercy. If they accept the animal in place of a human life, Tayo will be spared." With heavy hearts, they prepared for the ritual, hoping against hope that the spirits would show mercy. As the ritual began, Ife watched Diji with a mix of fear and regret, realizing the depth of her past mistakes and the impact they had on the people she loved. I called his bluff and continued to live my life as if nothing had happened. A few days later, the same man approached me again, saying that I had a few days to accept my calling or face a fate worse than death. I refused to believe that the shrine would choose a man like me to serve as its chief priest. After all, I was so young and had my whole life ahead of me. So I ignored the man and continued to live my life. Then came my accident, which rendered me blind and unable to walk. On the day I received news of your death, the strange man came to me again, saying it was not too late for me to answer my calling, as the spirits would not stop trying until I was dead. He promised that the spirits would heal me completely if I agreed to serve as their priest. Desperate to restore my sight and walk again, I agreed. The man took me to the shrine and presented me before the spirits, who restored my sight and made it possible for me to walk again. They gave me so much power, which allowed me to know that you were still alive. I monitored your every move and chased all the men in your life away. How did you think you could break our oath and live happily with another Diji? Asked Ife. who began to plead for mercy. I love you so much and can forgive you easily. However, the spirits who witnessed the oath have demanded a sacrifice from you for reneging on your promise. They have demanded a life sacrifice before they can set Teo free. Ife pleaded for Deji's help, saying they had brought a goat to use as a sacrifice, and that Deji should help her plead with the spirits to accept the animal as a substitute. Deji revealed that the spirits were not willing to accept an animal sacrifice. Terrified, Ife begged Deji to find another way, as she could not let Teo die. Deji then revealed that there was only one other way Teo would live again if Ife agreed to fulfill her promise under the oath to marry Deji and live with him as his wife forever. Ife, torn between saving Teo and honoring the oath she made with Deji, felt her world collapsing around her. She looked at Teo, who lay unconscious, and knew she had to save him. Deji asked what her choice would be, as the spirits demanded a balance and were not willing to accept anything less. Ife's mind raced as she struggled to find a solution. She felt a deep love for Teo and couldn't bear the thought of losing him. But the idea of being bound to Deji, especially after everything that had happened between them, filled her with dread. She looked at Deji and saw the remnants of the man she had once loved, now overshadowed by the responsibilities of a vengeful spirit. Ife looked down in confusion, tears pouring from her eyes. She knew that if she chose to marry Deji, it would not be out of love but out of a desperate need to save Teo. And that realization filled her with so much sorrow. With a heavy heart, she finally spoke, "Deji, I will fulfill my promise. I will marry you and live with you as your wife forever. Just please, save Teo." Deji's eyes softened for a moment before he nodded solemnly. The spirits, appeased by Ife's decision, began to calm. The healer and Deji performed the final rites, and gradually, Teo's condition started to improve. As Teo opened his eyes and regained consciousness, Ife felt a bittersweet mixture of relief and despair. She had saved the man she loved, but at the cost of her own freedom and happiness. Teo, still weak, looked at Ife and whispered, "What happened?" Ife smiled through her tears and replied, "Everything is going to be okay now, Teo. You're safe." But deep inside, she knew that her life had taken a turn she could never have imagined. So. Ife looked directly at Deji and apologized for all the pain she caused him, and for breaking their oath. However, she revealed that she could not marry him because her heart belonged to another. She expressed her willingness to do anything else to save Teo, as marrying Deji would only bring more pain and suffering. Deji was heartbroken to hear this and told Ife that if she was not willing to marry him, then Teo had to die. Ife immediately knelt before the shrine and pleaded with the spirits to spare Teo's life. She begged them to demand anything else in exchange. As soon as she said this, a strong wind began to blow through the shrine. Deji revealed that the spirits had accepted to take something else in exchange for Teo's life, all her memories with Teo. Ife would be purged of all the memories she had ever shared with Teo, even up to the day they met. It would be as if Teo never existed, and Ife would live her life without ever remembering him. This was the spirit's price for sparing Teo's life. Ife's heart sank at the thought of losing all the memories she had ever shared with Teo. Their love, the moments they shared, and the dreams they built together would be erased from her mind forever. It was an expensive price, but she was willing to pay it to save the life of the man she loved with all her heart. She turned to Deji, her eyes filled with tears, and accepted the spirit's demand. Deji nodded, and the ritual began. The air around the shrine grew colder, and a strange mist filled the atmosphere. Ife began to feel a strange sensation, as though a veil had been drawn over her mind. She could see the images of her time with Teo fading, slipping away like sand through her fingers. The pain was immense, but she remained steadfast, knowing this was her only choice. As the ritual concluded, the spirits accepted her sacrifice. The dark mist cleared, and the temperature around the shrine returned to normal. Ife, now devoid of the memories of her love for Teo, stood up, feeling a strange emptiness within her. She looked at Teo, who was slowly waking up, and felt nothing, no recognition, no emotion, just a blank slate. Teo opened his eyes and looked around, confused but alive. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice weak. What happened? He asked again, as his friend Kunal rushed to his side to explain all that had transpired. Tayo's eyes glanced around as he searched for If. He smiled when he saw her, but she looked at him with no recognition. If, are you okay? He asked, concerned. If looked at him blankly, then turned to Didiji. Who is this man? She asked, her voice devoid of any emotion. The whole place fell silent, and Tayo's face fell as he realized what had happened. His heart broke, understanding that If had sacrificed all their memories together to save his life. He tried to reach out to her, trying to connect with her once again, but If stepped back, confused and uncomfortable with the stranger before her. Tayo's heart shattered into a million pieces as he saw the woman he loved look at him like a stranger. All the memories they shared were gone in her mind, but still very fresh in his. It is your love, Tayo, he said to If, who looked at him terrified. In that moment, Tayo felt like ripping his mind out. All efforts to remind If of the times they shared failed, as If didn't seem interested in him. Tayo's mother, who had been watching everything, stepped forward and placed her hand on If's shoulder. You have shown great courage and love, she said, tears pouring down her eyes. I was wrong about you, and I am truly sorry for everything, she said, as If nodded her head, still confused and disconnected from the emotions around her. With heavy hearts, Tayo and his mother left the shrine, knowing that their lives would never be the same. If, now a stranger to them, watched as they said their final farewell. Tayo, finding it hard to accept his new reality, ran back to give If a hug, hoping she would remember who he was. They stood there for minutes, wrapped in each other's arms, and If, despite not remembering anything about Tayo, felt some peace in his arms. A peace that calmed her troubled heart and brought tears to her eyes. I will always love you, If, even if you can't remember me. I will never forget you, and I hope that someday you remember all the good times we shared and all that I was to you, Tayo said, bidding If farewell. If, feeling the sincerity in his voice, could not help but cry, although she didn't fully understand why. Diji watched the scene unfold with a heavy heart. He realized the depth of the bond between If and Tayo, and for a moment he felt a pang of guilt for the role he played in their separation. But he knew that the spirit's demand was beyond his control, and he could only offer If the chance to live a new life, free from the burdens of the past. As Tayo and his mother left the shrine, they carried with them the pain of their loss. Tayo's mother, whose heart was once filled with hatred for If, now wished that If could return with them and marry her son. Ify, on the other hand, felt a strange emptiness within her. She did not understand the depth of what she had lost, but she knew that something was missing. Her dreams were filled with bits and pieces of strange memories and places, which she found hard to remember. She returned to her family, who were glad to have her back. Tayo, however, returned home and struggled to live without If. He tried to move on, but everywhere he looked reminded him of her. The thought of If living without any memory of their love was a burden he carried with him daily. Yet, he decided to cherish their memories alone, holding on to the hope that If might one day remember and come back to him. The lesson to be learned from this story is that we should not make rash decisions, but think through the consequences of every decision we make. Nothing remains hidden forever, so we should try to be honest with those we hold dearly. Also, do not judge others based on their circumstances, but learn to be open and accept people for who they are. Finally, the story demonstrates that actions have consequences, and trying to escape or hide from the past can lead to greater problems. It serves as a reminder that it is better to face issues head-on, rather than avoiding them. I hope you enjoyed the story.